The sun had barely stretched its arms across the horizon when Elena hit the bike lane, her heart pounding in sync with the pedals. This wasn't just another morning ride. It was her one shot at a better life. No car, no backup plan, just her and that rusty old bike that creaked like it carried her hopes too. Around her, the world moved fast. Joggers passed, dogs barked, waves crashed. But inside her chest, a storm of anxiety brewed louder than any ocean breeze. Every bump on the path felt like a test. Her hands gripped the handlebars tighter each time the wheels trembled. She couldn't afford to fall. Not today. But life rarely consults your schedule. As she swerved to dodge a pothole, her balance betrayed her, and in an instant, she was on the ground, skin burning, pride bruised. Pain shot through her knees as she blinked back tears, not just from the fall, but from the fear that she'd be late. Her hands shook as she reached for the bike, her breath shallow, chest rising fast with panic. This interview meant more than a paycheck. It was the thin thread between her and the life she dreamed of. And now, that thread felt like it was slipping from her grasp. Just when despair threatened to swallow her whole, a pair of expensive cycling shoes stopped in front of her. She barely had time to register the man before he knelt beside her, his calmness slicing through her whirlwind of thoughts. He didn't rush. He didn't ask what happened. He simply extended a hand, steady, sure, like he'd done this before, picked people up from dark places. There was something oddly comforting about how he looked at her, not with pity, but curiosity, like he saw past her scuffed knees and wind-tangled hair. She wasn't used to that. People usually looked through her, not at her, especially men in pro-biking gear. But something in his silence felt safe, like he understood that words weren't needed just yet. As she brushed sand from her palms, her voice cracked through the quiet. "I have a job interview." Her eyes darted toward the city skyline in the distance, where opportunities waited behind glass walls and polished smiles. He nodded, understanding the urgency, but didn't push. No questions, just presence. She climbed back on her bike, wincing but determined. "I've come this far on my own," she whispered, more to herself than him. And with a quick thank you, she pedaled off, not realizing that some encounters, even the briefest ones, aren't just coincidences. Sometimes, they're the opening lines of an emotional story you never saw coming. He stood still for a second, watching her silhouette grow smaller against the rising sun. There was something magnetic about the girl with the blue blouse and scraped knees, pedaling like the world depended on it. And maybe it did, for her at least. Most people he met moved slowly, shielded by comfort. But she was fire, urgency, and raw wool wrapped in human form. His ride had always been a ritual, a way to clear his mind, to feel human again beyond the boardrooms and quarterly earnings. But today, the ritual was broken by something real, something messy. And strangely, it felt good. Not the fall, but the moment. The real story he'd stumbled into, brief as it was, had left a mark deeper than the asphalt ever could. Back on his bike, he found himself distracted. His pace slowed, the rhythm gone. His mind kept replaying the look in her eyes, not of helplessness, but of stubborn determination. She didn't want saving. She just wanted to keep moving. There was something noble in that, something you don't see often in people who are always chasing titles instead of truths. He passed a cafe he usually stopped at, but didn't feel like pausing anymore. His world of curated lattes and noise-canceling earbuds suddenly felt too clean, too quiet. That girl's scraped hands said more than 1,000 startup pitches ever could. She was the kind of story you don't read about in glossy magazines, the kind that sticks to your ribs. As he cut through the business district, the towering glass buildings reflected his image back at him. Polished, sharp, successful. But was that all there was? He couldn't stop thinking about how she refused help. Not out of pride, but belief that this was her journey, and she had to finish it on her own terms. That kind of courage, it's the heartbeat of touching stories people crave, but rarely live. When he reached the company's parking lot, he sat on his bike a little longer than usual. He wasn't quite ready to re-enter his world of perfectly ironed shirts and digital calendars. Something had shifted. It was subtle, like a whisper you can't quite make out. But it was there, And the day, once ordinary, now held a quiet tension. The kind that only comes when fate decides it isn't done playing yet. Unbeknownst to him, just blocks away, she was catching her breath, standing in front of a building that looked more like a monument than a workplace. The story hadn't ended on the bike path, not even close. In fact, it was about to twist in a way neither of them could have predicted. Elena stood at the entrance of Carrington and Company, watching her own reflection ripple across the curved glass doors. She wiped her sweaty palms on her skirt, trying to ignore the sting from the scrapes on her knees. The building wasn't just tall, it felt like a wall she had to climb, like it was silently questioning whether she truly belonged there. But after everything she had faced, turning back wasn't an option. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, she pulled the door open and stepped inside. The reception desk was sleek, impersonal. The woman behind it didn't smile, didn't look up, just gestured with a perfectly manicured nail toward a hallway. No good morning, no warmth. Elena walked the polished floors, her shoes clicking louder than her confidence. The bruises on her knees throbbed with every step, but she straightened her back, silently repeating, "You belong here. You belong here." The interview room was all glass and angles. Two men in dark suits barely looked up when she entered. One asked her name without shaking her hand. The other scribbled something on a clipboard. No small talk, no acknowledgement of her raw energy or battered appearance. They just started firing off questions, their tone cold, mechanical. But Elena? She stayed rooted in her truth. She answered with clarity, even when her voice trembled. Her story wasn't wrapped in fancy titles or prestigious internships. It was built from nights of studying after double shifts, from turning rejections into reasons to try again. She didn't try to impress. She tried to be real. And somewhere between the third and fourth question, her fear began to shift into focus. When they asked where she saw herself in 5 years, she smiled softly. Not because she had it all figured out, but because she finally believed she might actually have 5 years to plan for. She didn't talk about corporate ladders or leadership synergy. She talked about purpose, about building things that matter, about becoming someone who'd open the door for others, even if hers had taken forever to open. The room didn't warm up, not really, but something in the air shifted just slightly. One of the men stopped writing. The other leaned back in his chair. No one said it aloud, but her presence began to rearrange the space. She wasn't what they expected, but sometimes emotional story walks in wearing scuffed shoes and a heart too stubborn to quit. As she exited the room, her shoulders heavy yet lifted, she didn't notice the shadow lingering just down the hall. A man in cycling clothes paused mid-step, recognizing the woman who had just walked past the receptionist moments ago. The girl with the bike. The fire. The story that somehow wasn't quite finished yet. The hallway was quiet, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of office chatter. Mr. Carrington, still in his cycling gear, walked with the ease of someone who owned every inch of this empire. But even billionaires can be interrupted by memory. Through the frosted glass of the interview room, a face flickered into focus. He stopped mid-step, narrowing his eyes. There she was, the girl from the beach path. Her blouse slightly wrinkled, a faint smear of dried blood on her knee. Yet her posture was composed, unshaken. In a room built to intimidate, she didn't shrink. She showed up, not just physically, but with a presence that quietly demanded to be noticed. He didn't move closer, didn't reveal himself. That wasn't his style, but he watched carefully, not with the eyes of a CEO evaluating a candidate, but with the gaze of someone recognizing something deeply familiar, grit. He'd seen that same look years ago in his own reflection, back when his suits were borrowed and his shoes too tight. There was a rawness in her that cut through the corporate noise. No polish, no practiced charm, just unfiltered purpose. And strangely, it stirred something inside him. It reminded him of how much he'd drifted from the kind of fight she carried. He hadn't expected this moment to matter, but suddenly, it did. It mattered a lot. He stood there longer than he meant to. Her words were inaudible, but her expression told enough. She wasn't pleading. She was planting seeds, hoping something would grow. He found himself wondering what her resume said, then dismissed the thought. Resumes were paper. This girl was a real story, alive, breathing, showing up with scraped hands and unshakable resolve. A passing employee greeted him, snapping him out of the moment. He nodded back, but kept his thoughts guarded. He wouldn't interfere with the interview. That wasn't how he operated. But he made a silent decision then and there. He needed to know more. Not out of curiosity, but out of instinct. She wasn't like the others. As he walked away, he didn't realize how deeply the encounter had already altered his morning, and maybe more. The bike ride, the fall, the hallway, none of it felt random anymore. Some moments arrive quiet, disguised as nothing, and yet they change everything. And back in that room, Elena had no idea that her story had already reached someone who could rewrite her entire chapter. Back at her apartment, Elena sat by the window, legs bandaged, staring at the phone like it held the weight of her future. She replayed every word from the interview, wondering if her honesty had helped or hurt her. No Ivy League degree, no fancy internships, just her truth laid bare on the table. What if it wasn't enough? What if being real in a world of masks was the very thing that closed the door? Meanwhile, floors above that interview room, Mr. Carrington leaned against his office window, tapping a pen against his palm. He wasn't thinking about mergers or stocks or the upcoming board meeting. His thoughts kept circling back to the woman with the scraped knee. She hadn't asked for anything, not even a second glance. But her story, it had already planted itself in his mind like a seed refusing to be ignored. He asked his assistant a simple question. Who was the girl in the blue blouse with the bicycle? The assistant blinked, caught off guard, then scrambled to check. Mr. Carrington wasn't known for meddling in interviews. He barely remembered most of the candidates. But this time was different. This wasn't about credentials. It was about character. While others submitted portfolios and buzzwords, she had brought something rare: presence. The kind of energy that couldn't be taught or faked. The kind of resilience that doesn't show up in bullet points. He didn't care about the GPA she carried or the font on her resume. He cared that she had fallen hard and gotten up anyway. That was the heartbeat of every emotional story worth following. He called the HR director with a tone that meant business. I want her in. She might not check every box, but she checks the only one that matters. There was a pause on the other end. Do you want to sit in on the next interview? The director asked. He shook his head. No, I just want to make sure we don't miss her. It wasn't favoritism. It was vision. Downstairs, her name was just one among dozens. On paper, she blended in. But in motion, in life, she stood out. And for the first time in a long while, Mr. Carrington remembered what it felt like to fight for something with everything you had. That spirit had built his empire. Now, he saw it standing at the front door, asking not for a handout, but a chance. Elena still didn't know any of this. All she knew was that she'd given her best, and sometimes that had to be enough. But fate has a strange way of rewarding the unseen. And just when she was ready to put the day behind her, her phone buzzed. And with it, a new chapter stirred to life, wrapped in curiosity, invitation, and something far greater than she expected. The call came early, before the city had fully stretched awake. Elena almost didn't answer. Unfamiliar number, same anxiety. But when she picked up and heard the words, "We'd like to offer you the position," her breath caught. And then came the second part. There's also a mentorship opportunity, personally backed by our CEO. Her heart skipped. Had she heard that right? She sat there frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear even after the call ended. What did that even mean? Why her? She wasn't anyone special. At least, that's what the world had told her for years. But now, for the first time, someone wasn't just giving her a job. They were betting on her future. And deep down, she knew that didn't happen by chance. When she arrived at the office, the receptionist actually smiled this time. Everything looked different, even though nothing had changed except her. She was no longer the girl rushing in, hoping to be noticed. She walked with the quiet strength of someone who had been seen, really seen. And then, just past the glass doors, there he was, waiting. Mr. Carrington stood in a tailored suit now, but she recognized him immediately. "We've met," he said gently. as if it were a secret only they shared. Her eyes widened, the realization crashing into her all at once. He had been the man on the bike, the stranger who helped her, the man who hadn't needed to, but did. And now, here he was again, at the doorway of everything she'd dreamed of. She didn't know what to say, but she didn't have to. He smiled, gestured for her to follow, and just like that, the world expanded. He introduced her to the team, shared his vision, and treated her not as a project, but as a peer. That kind of belief, it's rare. It's what fuels touching stories that people remember for years. Not because they're dramatic, but because they're real. As the day unfolded, she kept catching glimpses of her reflection in the office windows. Not to fix her hair, but to remind herself, this is happening. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, and it hadn't come from perfection. It had come from persistence, from a moment of pain, transformed by presence, from showing up, even when everything told her not to. But this wasn't the end, not even close, because what began with scraped knees and a helping hand had only just opened its first page. And if the universe had brought her here through a fall and a stranger's kindness, what else could it be planning next? What would you have done in her place? Would you have accepted help or pushed through alone? And what if the person who saw you at your lowest ended up being the one who opened a door to your future? Stories like this make us rethink everything about chance, courage, and how far a single moment can go. Have you ever experienced a twist of fate like this? Tell me in the comments. I really want to hear your real story. Maybe it was a stranger, a random encounter, or a decision you made on a hard day that changed your path forever. These touching stories aren't just about others. They're about all of us. And hey, if this emotional story moved you, imagine what else is coming. Hit that subscribe button, tap the bell so you don't miss the next one, and share this video with someone who needs to believe in unexpected beginnings again. Because sometimes the story you needed finds you.